Hey there, I'm Trevor Youngquist and I'm a licensed mental health counselor. And in this video, we're going to be covering guilt. We're going to talk about what it is, where it comes from, when is it justified and adaptive versus unhelpful and self-sacrificial, and also we're going to talk about some tools for addressing and alleviating guilt. A helpful starting point for the discussion is differentiating between guilt and shame. And there's a lot of different definitions floating around for these two out there. But I think the most helpful is that guilt is the sense that I've done something bad, whereas shame is the sense that I am bad, or that some part of me is bad, broken, unlovable, or unacceptable. Today we'll just be focusing on guilt, the sense that I've done something bad, and it comes about in response to when we've taken some kind of action that goes against the social standard or against our morals. So the function of guilt is to preserve our social relationships and to shape our behavior towards what is collaborative and moral. So after we do something that causes harm to another or goes against our morals, we feel bad. We feel bad emotionally in our bodies. You might relate to the experience of thinking back on something you feel really guilty about and just kind of cringing and just contracting internally because it feels so bad to be holding that sense of guilt. And it can really lead to a sense of anguish, especially in the immediate aftermath of doing something that we feel really guilty about. It feels really, really bad. And the function of that is to shape our behavior away from doing that behavior again and preserving relationships if we're acting in ways that could cause harm to our relationships or our reputation in the community and our general standing within the tribe. It's only through making us feel bad that guilt can shape our behavior, because when we feel bad, we have a strong incentive not to do the thing that leads to that feeling again in the future. Human beings are a deeply social species. And we gained a survival advantage historically through our ability to collaborate in really sophisticated ways and take care of each other and look out for each other, share resources, and innovate together. And unlike other animals that, have wings or great speed, or they can burrow, or they have sharp claws, these different kind of physical adaptations meant to help them survive, human beings don't have those things. We instead have the very advanced ability to collaborate and work together with other humans. Our brains developed to be as advanced as they are in large part to help facilitate the complex social relationships that gave us an edge in surviving. If we want more evidence about the vital importance of social bonds among human beings, we don't need to look any further than attachment theory and some of the recent research into the neurobiology of relationships, which shows that human beings are fundamentally wired to connect with each other. And that's the core drive of human beings, because we're born as human beings in a complete and utter state of dependence for years, which is somewhat unusual among animals. And because we are so dependent on our caregivers, our adults around us, not just for food, shelter, water, hygiene, but also for emotional needs, for emotional regulation, and for developing a healthy sense of self and an understanding of how to be in relationship to other people in a healthy way. So the yearning to bond with other people and develop relationships is built into us from birth because it is so pivotal to our capacity to survive. Given that our social bonds matter this much for our survival, it would make sense that there would be some mechanisms that would have evolved to maintain those relationships. And guilt is one of those mechanisms. Guilt encourages us to avoid doing things that would jeopardize our relationships or our social standing. And it encourages us, if we have done something that goes against the social standards or in some way was harmful to a relationship that's important, it encourages us to try to repair that relationship if possible, or at least not do the action again that could further jeopardize our social bonds. Generally, when we feel guilt, it doesn't fundamentally threaten our sense of self or our self-esteem. It doesn't make us think we're a fundamentally bad person if we do something we feel guilty about. That being said, in more extreme cases of doing something that really deeply went against your moral compass or that caused a lot of harm to others, there could be a questioning of a deeper sense of your character or, who am I that I did this action that I now feel so guilty about? And in that case, guilt can morph a bit more into shame, that sense that I am bad. So guilt is a mechanism to protect social bonds. And on one hand, guilt arises because we have an inbuilt capacity for empathy and a kind of a preference for pro-social behavior. As far as empathy goes, we have the ability to feel into the emotions of another person, to put ourselves in their shoes. And so when we do something that might cause harm to another, we have the inbuilt ability to feel what it would be like to be on the receiving end of that, or to see the pain that we might have inflicted on someone through certain action we took. And through our empathy, we can feel bad for that person and feel bad about our action for causing the harm. And that can help us tap into a sense of guilt if we value not harming other people. And that can help us as well to repair the relationship when we can understand the pain we may have caused another and we feel bad about it. There's also been a growing body of research in the last 15 years that's shown that pre-verbal infants who are between 6 months and a year old, when they're shown different displays of either pro-social or anti-social behavior in a puppet show, for example, and one puppet is doing pro-social things like helping another puppet or supporting them in their efforts, and another puppet later is stealing from another puppet or hindering the efforts of another puppet. These little pre-verbal infants who don't have the rational part of their minds online yet, they prefer the pro-social behavior. They're drawn towards the puppet who did the pro-social action, and they're not drawn to the puppet who was stealing, who was acting in these antisocial ways, which suggests that we have this inbuilt preference for tribal and collaborative behavior, which would make sense because historically it's been so pivotal for our survival as a species. Aside from that, guilt also arises from familial or societal conditioning. So within our family and society, there are behaviors that are considered good and acceptable and desirable, and there are behaviors that are considered bad and unacceptable. And we can feel guilty based on our conditioning if we do those things that are considered bad or unacceptable. And here's where guilt can go wrong, because those conditionings are not always the most healthy. And sometimes based on our conditioning, we can feel guilty for doing things that are truly healthy for us and truly necessary for our growth and psychological wholeness. For example, we might be conditioned to feel guilt about setting boundaries or prioritizing ourselves or following our authentic truth. For example, a person might live in a family or community that doesn't accept their sexual orientation, and so they might feel a lot of guilt acting upon that sexual orientation because they've been conditioned to feel that way, even though it's such a natural and healthy thing for them to be doing that. We might also feel guilt about distancing ourselves from people or institutions that are really not healthy for us, or we might feel guilty about having certain normal emotions that humans have. Like we might feel guilt about feeling sad or angry or afraid or even joyful. We might feel guilty about feeling joy if we've been conditioned by our family or society to feel like that is in some way not a good thing to be feeling. Maybe we're going to make other people feel bad if we're so exuberant, or any number of reasons why certain normal emotions might have been discouraged in some way, where we feel guilty when we do feel those emotions. We feel like we're doing something we shouldn't be. So that's a bit about the landscape of guilt. Now, what can we do to address guilt? First, it's important to recognize or ask the question, is the guilt justified and healthy, or is it unjustified and self-sacrificial in an unnecessary way? So if the guilt is justified and it took place in the context of an important relationship, then one thing that we can do to really lessen our sense of guilt is to try to repair the relationship. So apologizing, expressing an understanding of the impact of our action on another person, and doing what we can to make amends. And maybe we have to ask them how we can make it up to them. And then doing that thing if possible. And implicit in all of this is that if we've caused harm through our actions and we feel guilty about it, then that guilt will hopefully stop us from doing that action in the future. And a repair doesn't mean that much if we continue to do the behavior that causes the harm. We all make mistakes and take missteps in relationships, and learning how to repair when we have done something that we regret is so important for developing healthy relationships and trusting relationships, and relationships that are resilient to the ups and downs of life. Assuming we didn't do something that ruined the relationship, in which case then maybe repair is not on the table. If you don't get the opportunity to repair because after you took a certain action that was harmful, that bridge is burned and that relationship is done, then one thing that you can do to alleviate your own sense of guilt, or just work with the sense of guilt, is just to be sure that you are not going to do that behavior in the future. That really learning from the lesson and heeding what the guilt had to say can lead to a sense of transformation and a lightening of the burden over time. It's really helpful if you're carrying a lot of guilt to be able to share it with safe and non-judgmental others. That could be in individual therapy or in group therapy, in a recovery community, or just with safe friends or people you're close to who are able to hear you out and still accept you despite, an action you took that you're not proud of. And when we can feel accepted by other people in our imperfections and mistakes, then it's easier to accept ourselves and to look forward and see how we can move forward from this event we might feel a lot of guilt about, and how hopefully we can do some good with our life, even if we feel remorse about certain things. And there might not be a way that we can immediately address that sense of guilt. We might have to bear that burden for a while. And that's really necessary sometimes for guilt to do what it's supposed to do. We need to feel bad about certain actions that are immoral or that don't align with who we want to be in order to really feel a conviction not to do that thing again, because we don't want to cause the harm and we don't want to feel that bad feeling of guilt again in the future. In my personal life, I found that it's the things that I felt a lasting sense of guilt about that have been the most powerful in reevaluating my choices and my guiding principles, and that have led to real lasting change in my behaviors. So we can't just wave a magic wand and make our guilt go away, but it does tend to get softer with time, and also as we reinforce our identity as someone who would not do that harmful behavior again that we feel guilty about. We can accumulate evidence that we are no longer a person who would do that, and that can also help alleviate guilt that we may carry from choices we made in the past. So we've talked now about addressing and working with guilt that's healthy and adaptive, and that's helping us correct immoral behavior or harmful behaviors to our relationships. But what about guilt that's not very healthy, that's coming from conditioning from our family or society, that's holding us back from being able to honor our own needs or have healthy, normal emotional experiences? If the guilt is not warranted and it's coming at an unacceptably high price for you, then one great thing to do is to develop the tolerance to withstand the discomfort and to stand up to the conditioning that is telling you that these normal and healthy things are not acceptable. In investigating guilt, you might notice that the guilt is covering over other emotions that may be uncomfortable, like anger or disgust or sadness or fear, or, like we said earlier, even joy, if you were conditioned to believe that that was somehow threatening to the social order of things. Noticing the core emotions that may be lingering under your sense of guilt can help to soften the sense of guilt as you open up to those emotions and sort of reclaim them and integrate them into your sense of self, and accept that they're healthy parts of a full human experience. The same goes for if you're feeling guilty about some need or desire you have. Really looking at those needs and desires and integrating them more deeply into your sense of self can help soften any sense of guilt you might have been conditioned to experience around acknowledging those needs or desires or following them. Ideally, as you work to lessen the sense of self-sacrificial guilt that may be covering over normal emotions or needs, you can learn to then integrate those emotions or needs into your sense of self and then take action on them. Take action to set healthy boundaries, or go after what you need to do to live out your authentic truth in the world, and to have reasonable, authentic feelings that any human is entitled to have. Okay, that is it for this video. I hope something has been useful for you. If so, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.